Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to ISRA's YouTube channel. Today we're going to look at Islamic education, looking at two different educational systems. One of them is Islamic studies in the Madrasa system, and the other one is Islamic education in the academic system, particularly within the Western world, and exploring how they have things in common and maybe where they have differences as well. And, where they can both improve possibly in today's world. So welcome, we have Professor Mehmet Özalp and we have Dr. Sadık Ansari with us. Can I first start with the question of what do we mean by madrasa-style Islamic studies learning? Maybe if I can start with yourself, Professor Mehmet.
Well, the madrasa-style Islamic learning is the style that was developed by Muslims over the millennia. It first started with chairs in mosques, certain scholars teaching through a pulpit, but then it became, in 10th century, a institutionalized form, an institution where different disciplines would be taught together, different Islamic disciplines, tafsir, fiqh, theology, hadith, and others, and including Arabic, of course. They became the first high institutes of higher learning in the world, actually, the first universities developed through this madrasa system. And then this was reformed again in 12th century by Imam Ghazali, the Nizamiya madrasa system, and that's when scientific topics were brought in, astronomy, mathematics, logic, and so on, were brought in and studied in madrasas. So after Imam Ghazali, yeah. They were the premier educational institutions invented by Muslims, developed over time and reformed over time, and came all the way to today. But there's been, of course, last couple of centuries, discontinuities, or maybe the quality was reduced, or madrasas could not meet with the change of times and places. So I guess that's what we're going to talk about today.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's given us some good background on what madrasa-style Islamic studies is. But what about when we're talking about Islamic studies in the university system? What do we mean by that? And I do know that there are different views on what it looks like, and there are probably different models. But did you want to, you've gone through some of the, I guess, education system yourself. What did you think, Sadık?
I've tried dabbling with both, and I've had limited experience of both. Definitely, I personally would, like we were chatting before, I feel like there's pros and cons in both, and I have great respect in both the madrasa style, or although we didn't want to call this, but the type of Islamic education that takes place in the East, which is where my limited experience of time spent in Egypt and in Turkey. Still, most Western Muslims end up going overseas to gain further Islamic studies. So along their way, they see some of the goods and also some of the negatives. And there's a lot of great thing happening in the East, but great shortcomings too, particularly when it comes to critical thinking, historical context, reality. And in the West, I've seen great, both yourself and myself have did a master's in Islamic studies at one of the most prestigious universities here in Sydney, but we're certainly aware of its shortcomings, both when it came to Arabic teaching and generally Islamic studies. Sometimes it's taught as like a sociologist, as an anthropologist phenomena, as if you're outside looking at this political situation unravel in the Middle East, and that comes under Islamic studies. So
it does. It's very interesting. It's when I look at my degree, it's masters in Master of Arts in Islamic and Arabic Studies, but I felt like it was more political Islamic studies, as in it was about the countries and the politics of those countries. It's very different, I guess, I would say, to the Master of Islamic Studies that's currently offered at, say, Charles Sturt University. And this is where I do see that there is sometimes, all the courses, Islamic studies courses, say in Australia, put under the same umbrella, but they really shouldn't be. I guess,
if I may just add, the Islamic studies in modern times within a university has developed in two ways. One of them is within Muslim countries themselves. I mean, that could be discussed. But we're in Australia, and possibly you're listening to this from a English-speaking world country. In the English-speaking world, the Islamic studies started as Orientalism. So it was study of Islam as outsiders. These Christian scholars or who are not Muslim, non-Muslim, were studying Islam in a different way, very critical, sometimes to find problems in it, and they were publishing very prolifically. So that style of Islamic studies have died since Edward Said did a very successful critique of Orientalism with his book Orientalism. That kind of died down.
Sorry, maybe with the exception of Hadith studies, because I'm a bit involved in that.
Okay.
Some elements are still trickling, and there's
It's
still
still
a debate.
it's still there. I'm not denying that.
Yeah.
But what's happening now for the last 15 years is that Muslims or Muslim scholars who have grown up or received a living and practicing in Western countries have developed institutions of higher learning, or are introducing courses in the established universities like the program that we have developed that are teaching Islam from within its tradition, like you would do in a madrasa, but maybe not exactly like madrasa, but within a university, but you're still teaching Islam from its own tradition. I think this is new. This is brand new, and it's only been around for the last 15 years.
Yeah, on that point, I guess, to be fair, universities provide Islamic studies courses based on, I think, the student profile, or you can create a student profile. And so the ones offered by Isra Chastot University, 98% are Muslim students. It's going to be very different to the university courses offered by, say, Western Sydney or Griffith, because most of their students predominantly non-Muslim. So the way you teach Islamic studies to non-Muslims is going to be different to the way you teach, Islamic studies to Muslim students. And I think that therefore your audience does matter. But there was, I guess, a huge need for these classical Islamic studies in the West. Would you agree with that? I mean, we were talking about how this came up in 2009 onwards, really, where we're seeing these classical Islamic studies really developing in the Western world. Did either of you?
But first of all, that divide we have, our Christian brothers have the same issue where they, like recently I moved, so my neighbor, he's a pastor at a church, so he did his PhD, but then he also had to do his seminary education, or what are they called? Seminary, but sometimes they call it a Master of Divinity or something, but pretty much how to be a pastor. And we have that issue as well, Muslims in the West, where people are putting the time to be an imam, but that's not being recognized, unfortunately, not as a seminary nor as accredited. And then you also need that academic side of more. I think that different faith traditions have the same experience, but because we just more recently. But I think with the Muslims in the West, it's the same with all the major, as Dr. Mehmet mentioned, the Muslim institutes like Zaytuna, Cambridge, here, Isra in Australia, we have Bayan in America. Majority of them are Muslim, 98% I believe will be Muslim students and Muslim teachers. So it's a new interesting phenomenon that now we did a conference on Hadith, and we were expecting, okay, it's Hadith, there's a lot of controversy, we're going to get a lot of skeptical things from the more Orientalist perspective. But most of the people in Islamic studies in Western universities were young junior PhD graduates with a Muslim background. That's now the field is changing.
Oh, interesting. Okay, it's. I want to bring it back to the madrasa. So we can dig a little deeper into the madrasa and then the university as well. So what is the Dr. Mehmet? What are some of the, I guess, challenges around madrasa-style Islamic studies in today's time? And what are some of the benefits? Maybe talk to both.
Yeah. I think we can look at it from many angles. I think the curriculum needs to be looked at, like what subjects are taught. Does it sufficiently provide the foundation or formation of a Muslim scholar? Yes, the classic disciplines, tafsir, hadith, fiqh, and so on, have to be taught. They are the core subjects. But outside of that, I think we need to complement it by psychology, sociology, like contemporary subjects that you have to be aware of in order to serve within societies in which we live in. That's one thing. Number two, in the learning outcomes, like the taxonomy of what are you supposed to get from an institute or education of higher learning, the madrasa system relies a lot on memorization and recollection of information or knowledge, which are good. We need to do that, but they're seen to be at the lower end of the taxonomy. Like on top of that, you've got application of knowledge, analysis of knowledge, critical evaluation, and creation of new knowledge. So these are sometimes not thought about, not implemented in a madrasa system. I would also say that the assessments were in the madrasa system is basically oral examination. The written examination is the assessments are very simple and brief. There's written examinations today, but in the old days it was all based on oral examination. I have to say, we may have to come back to that because of AI problems. All universities are having major issues with assessment today, written assessments.
Yes.
And that we are actually thinking about going back to some sort of an oral examination. It's interesting. But I really think that the university assessment designs are better and more advanced, and that it really forces students to learn and pass these exams. And if they do well, they learn a lot in that process. So these are some of the things that I think the madrasa system can benefit from.
Yeah, I'll just add with that, like, I sort of see it as a madrasa, but also even the universities in Muslim countries. So my friends, when I was in Egypt, I used to ask them, how are you doing your Azhar exams and all that? They would go to university for the first year and second year. The third and fourth year, they would not even go to uni.
Okay.
But when it came to exam time, they would literally memorize the textbook. Literally, they memorize the textbook and repeat the answers. And I saw this in Egypt, and, you know, sometimes very simple things like having a projector, with notes, and forget about things like anyway, I don't have a first-hand experience, but this is from my friends. I lived in a dormitory where it was 99% Azhar students living there. So from the stories they told me, things like PowerPoint assessment assignments, essays was never really considered.
Non-existent. Yeah.
But and then when I had stayed in Turkey for a while, this was before the more Syrian scholars were. Now Turkey's become a bit of a knowledge hub for many Muslims from the West, but before then it was same thing. Some of the leading universities in Turkey in Islamic studies, like Marmara University, the top graduates had never written an essay. So generally, we sort of lack that critical thinking. That's a given.
I had that experience with an applicant that we got. He said that he wanted to apply for PhD, and he said that he did a thesis in his undergraduate study. This is from a university in a Muslim country. And I said, can you show me what you've done in your thesis? And he just showed me a basic translation. And translation, of course, it means you know the language, you know Arabic and so on. But that's a proficiency in Arabic. It's not proficiency in thesis writing. And I was disappointed, to be honest, not in him, but
at what level was he doing that?
At the bachelor level, but it's a 4-year course.
Yeah.
But you're supposed to finish with a thesis.
Masters in Azhar, same thing.
Yeah.
But it was a manuscript. He was critically editing, but predominantly was translating.
Just translating, putting some notes. And I mean, it's a good thing to do, but it's not a thesis. You don't even consider that as an assessment. Unless you are doing that as a translation or Arabic assessment.
Yeah.
So I think we really have to have the discussion, as you mentioned, the different levels, depending on which level. We need to talk about the pros and cons of Madrasa University at a bachelor level,
or
at a master's level. At a PhD level, but we've seen it too. Like, I've had to rely on Arabic theses, and sometimes they're very good. But as one non-Muslim Western scholar, I think if I'm not mistaken, Christopher Melcher, he said, at best those theses are like a research assistant. They gather all that information together, and sometimes for the student at the West, it's easier because all the information's there, but that analysis is not there.
Analysis, and that it's high level of that taxonomy is the synthesis of new knowledge. So, you know, that's something that's really honed into. So here in the Western academia, where as a bachelor, it's level, there's more knowledge gathering and learning. But as you go higher, critical analysis, and then critical analysis, and then you ultimately meant to synthesize new information, especially at a PhD level.
Yeah, so when people ask me, I really encourage people from the East and West that they're going to do a PhD, do it in the West, because English is the sought after language. Even in those countries, there's pressures for them to do it in English.
Yeah.
But at a bachelor's level, if I had to ask you guys, look, a mosque is looking for an imam. There's 3 graduates. You don't know who they are. One is from Azhar, one is from a Muslim university in Australia, one from America, one from England. Who would you choose?
I personally would go for the Australian one because of the context that they've grown up in. And this is where I feel like context of the knowledge is very important. And I think one of the reasons why we, established the university courses here is because people wanted to go overseas to study, and they still do. You pointed that out. Yeah. But where you study, the context you study in, surely makes a difference. You've studied in different contexts, and surely, but you grew up here, so you had that advantage. But surely where you study makes a difference. So I personally would go for the Australian context, because I've seen imams where there's been a cultural clash between, say, the imam, even though they're trying their hardest, don't get me wrong, between them and the youth particularly. And that can be a challenge sometimes as well.
I would go with...
But you're assuming it's a Muslim... Sorry to cut you. It's a Muslim country, raised imam, studied in Azhar, and come here, right?
Okay.
You're not assuming raised here.
Yes, you're right.
That's right. So there's a cultural migration thing.
Yes, you're right.
I would go for who can recite the best the Quran. I don't want to listen to... It's an imam, like that. 90% of the job will be about recitation. Yeah. But obviously... that's a very good question that really tests what you do. But I just want to say this, perhaps. Like we get all sorts of students, alhamdulillah, thankfully. I see 2 types of students, generally. Like we do get people who have studied in a madrasa style or a mosque alim program. They are fantastic. Like they have such well grounding, such well foundation in Islamic sciences
and Arabic.
They have excellent Arabic. They can read Arabic texts. Quran. They've got memorization of the Quran, certain passages. Hadith, fiqh. It's great. But
not all of them. Sometimes, especially with Arabic, it's very sad. Like in Turkey, people study Imam Hatib, 12 years. Then they study Ilahiyat, 4 years. And I studied in a program, you've been there too, where it was all for Islamic studies graduate, mainly from Turkey, but some from Egypt. We still had to do a 2-month Arabic course from beginning.
Yeah,
there's like
I do. I know
the Arabic part is serious, and even like Dr. Suhaib Said, I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning this, but he mentioned that he has friends from Azhar. Sometimes he listens to the Quran. They can't recite. Sometimes they're not fit enough to be.
That's why I said recitation.
That would be good too.
I guess no education system is foolproof for the bad student.
That's right.
Or someone who doesn't have the intellectual capacities to excel in this, and they don't try. Like I remember, I was chasing imams to examine me. After studying books and But my point was earlier, analytic skills is lacking that's very visibly with those type of students. I think that's where we complement, really, when they study with us and graduate, they really become good at that as well. So it's really makes produces a wholesome individual. At the same time, we have these fantastic applicants who've studied all their life in universities, they finished masters, and now they're interested in Islamic studies. They come with excellent analytic skills, but no grounding in the Islamic disciplines.
Yeah, or access to the text.
So or they can't have access to the text because they don't know Arabic or they don't have those texts, or they have never sat down and studied like very in depth. So, and then you have to cover that deficiency as well in our courses. So it's really challenging to really combine both. But that's what we have to do in our time.
So we've kind of touched on the weaknesses and strengths of the madrasa style, I feel, like throughout. We talked about some of the strengths of the academic side of Islamic studies. What are some of the weaknesses of the academic Islamic studies?
Where should we begin from?
Wherever you like.
Before you alluded, if I jump in, but it's the moment if you want to mention anything, but Depends really who's teaching it, which program, where you are. I had friends who've studied, and some of the most respected scholars from like Yale University, Chicago University, and all them. Sometimes the teachers can't. They do basic Arabic mistakes when they're reading a text. There's a very interesting talk relevant to this. Sheikh Yasir Qadi talked about madrasa and thing when he went to Qatar. He said he was in a class and the teacher says, "La ta'khudhuhu sunnatan wa la nawm." You know, very simple mistake. For us, we take it for granted. So sometimes the command of the text and Arabic is very weak. And you don't blame them because they don't have those years of experience of reading in front of a teacher, being corrected. That's one way to start sometimes. From at a tools level, at a philosophical level, sometimes, although they claim to be very objective, but they're just as biased as anyone else, sometimes more biased. Within the hadith studies, you know, there's two sheikhs, Joseph Scott and Goldziher, the Sheikh al-Mustashriqeen, they call it. They don't realize it, but a lot of the discussion, everything is still following the same narrative that was set by them. I mean, there's a lot of good arguments there, but so yeah, it's not as objective as they claim to be, and no one is really. And we sometimes so I think that's some of the faults that I see.
I'm going to go a bit more, I guess, some of the challenges we had in developing our courses. I feel like the biggest challenge is to fit the content in a finite course, because you can only fit so many subjects. It becomes really expensive. I feel the cost of education in university is a deterrent. In our time, that is.
So when you say subjects, it's 24 subjects, mind you, right? But so it's quite a few, but you're saying it's still not enough.
Finite course.
Yeah.
But that's because we're trying to capture the whole of Islamic studies in a bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
Because in Azhar, you have an opportunity to do it in Usul Din, in Tafsir, in Sharia, and then you can put more subjects in one. Yeah.
I have to say the madrasa education became like that in maybe 14th century onwards. It was just reduced to certain text, and they were very brief, and all you had to do is just pass those. But initially, when in the first 3 centuries of Islamic history, when people studied, what they did was they studied with scholars on the books that they chose. So basically, a student would design their own course. You know, I'm going to study with this scholar, this book. That, you know, in fiqh, I'm going to scholar with that scholar about, let's say, Bukhari's collection, or what. So whatever they collect in the arsenal of education, and they got ijaza from all of them, and traveled often different cities. So that was fantastic. There's actually some talk in our time of doing that, where people pick and choose who they study, what topics they study. They basically design their own courses. I don't know if everyone can do that.
In America, there's a liberal arts college that we have a friend of mine, Dr. Bilal Ansari, who's a chaplain. They literally design their degree. The students choose it, and they select it. So in a way, it exists. Yeah.
But that sounds like a luxury to me, though. You know, like I'm just thinking about.
It's not going to happen, but
the challenge is, like, a lot of our students say here they want to have that foundational Islamic knowledge. They want to have some level of Arabic, but also want to cover all the important disciplines or sub-disciplines of Islamic studies. So they wouldn't have the luxury of, I'll delve into usul al-fiqh, because also a lot of keep in mind in the West, when Muslims are studying Islamic studies, there's very few professions that are available for them. So often they've got their own profession, they've got to pay bills, and on top of that, they're really trying to get a foundation in their Islamic studies.
Very important
so
point.
Very
important point.
Lack of career.
In the times when Imam Shafi, Imam Hanafi kind of studied and they had students, the most talented people were studying Islamic studies.
Yeah.
And they had, once they graduated, they had top salaries.
And positions, I'm guessing.
And positions.
Like roles
Like
in
when
society.
Imam Ghazali, for example, left the Nizamiya Madrasa in Baghdad to go home, there were 600 people behind him walking to his house. So imagine the pomp. And they were getting top salaries. Perhaps they would get in 1 month the salary of the highest official in 1 year. So it was
they're like
that
the professors. like of today, academic professors of today, would you say?
Well, they're
Do you
much.
think academics are very well off today? Not my experience in Australia and in America. but,
Unfortunately, Islamic studies became the least funded part of a department in a university in Muslim countries, and also the people who couldn't make it to doctor, engineer,
that's
or lawyer.
And
The
sometimes, to be
smartest,
honest,
the most talented people did not study Islamic studies, and this is a modern problem. Fortunately, that's changing.
In the
It's
West
changed.
or in the Muslim world as
It's
well?
changed in the West, I should say. Like there's more people, smart, really talented people who wants to study, who wants to excel. Like our student base is very good, for example, probably higher than Chartered universities. You know, the average.
You have doctors
sort of
and
the-
lawyers
exactly.
and engineers, all sorts.
So it's really great to see that's changing, but that's been one of the biggest problems of modern times. Where talented people go, and by the way, when smart people decide to study, they're usually middle ages, like in their 30s or something, 40s. It's only when they are a little bit financially well off and they've got married and their life is settled, then they feel, okay, I gotta go back to my religion and study, maybe do something, contribute to the world in that field.
Yeah. But that limited, I guess, positions or career pathway is a challenge, and that's why they do have to have those, let's call them day jobs of being an engineer, lawyer, doctor, nurse, whatever it might be, but then trying to do this on the side, and that creates its own, I guess, challenges as
and
well.
that's with the humanities at large in the West. If you have a PhD, like I remember in high school, my science teacher used to say, you know, an arts degree, which I ended up getting an arts degree from my bachelor's. He had a very bad example, like something you get out from the toilet. You don't really need it. But if you even have a PhD in let's say, in philosophy, how many people with a PhD? Oh, I met an international student on scholarship. A very close friend of mine did a PhD on music from Italy. He came here, and now he was struggling to get a job as a librarian because there's a long process to become a librarian. It's not easy. So I think humanities in general has that issue, and then we can talk about our own community. How much do we really prize scholarship? That's another thing. Sometimes we just want mosques and bricks and land, but we don't really value the institute of scholarship. Or we expect the
Do you
imam
think
to
so?
be sometimes.
I think that respect is still
I mean, like
there,
in Sydney, how many mosques have full-time imams? Like I came
I
from
guess
a
when
mosque
you value
recently.
it, you fund
They
it.
were
that's
debating whether they said we don't need a full-time imam. We'll just get brothers to, lead the prayers. As long as the mosque is good, mind you, the mosque, mashallah, started buying all the houses next door. They've bought the street, but they can't have a.
They can afford to buy the
They
houses.
can afford to, but they didn't see the
pay
value
salary.
for an imam.
That's
Maybe there was
interesting.
a bit of a feeling, but I think America's a bit more ahead of this. America, they put advertisements, they want imams. Apparently, some of them are even saying, "What's your social media followers for the imam?" That's another problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And start maybe to ask for, do you have counseling degree? Do you have
But-
other psychology degree?
But it's a bit
That's
of a
the
humanities problem in general.
It is, but that's interesting because the imam, it's sort of very much simplifying it than in that case example you gave where they just lead the 5 daily prayers. But for me, when I think about imams, it's a much more involved role, hopefully, than that.
Yeah,
And, they would be doing so much more. And I don't know which one you said, you mentioned 90% of their job is leading the prayers, but I would think that would be 20-30% of their role.
No, in Australia, 90% is sorry to do with settling divorce issues.
To be honest, when I was growing up, the only religious education or Islamic education was available in mosques. So, and I did meet a lot of imams. Some of them didn't care at the time that I was interested. Just answered my questions just briefly, and they sent me off. But then I was fortunate to meet one imam who really was great and took me and the young brothers under his wing, and he gave us a fantastic education for 2 years. So that I'm really happy to be part that experienced that, and I learned a lot. All those rough edges were all pruned, and you really go deep into this tradition. That wouldn't be possible without that imam. So it really depends on the imam as well.
True.
But also, I think if the imams are good quality and they're really genuinely, sincerely, they want to serve, the communities would enable that. They wouldn't be preventing if they see the value from that imam.
Okay,
But I guess they don't want to just pay a high salary and get no value out of that.
Yeah, I mean, like it's not even we need an imam. That concept is not. Whereas in America, I saw the mosques have a general religious director. That's what it's called, a religious director, which is not even an imam, and he has sometimes 2-3 imams underneath him. And usually they were the better mosques.
Good
and
idea,
then,
actually.
And then sometimes we had like the mosque in. I forgot, in Dallas, sometimes they have a female
I was going to
counselor,
say, a lot
social
of
worker.
them are big on that as well, having a female staff.
Yeah,
in the
we need
mosques.
that.
Maybe that's what's lacking in countries like Australia, where it's you don't have that religious director role, because you expect either imams to manage things, which they're not always good at, managing
right.
staff,
That's not their strength always.
or the mosque presidents to manage things, and they don't have time. They're voluntary jobs, so you have that missing. Job, the role.
So they're like the
it seems that
CEO
the
of
American
and this goes
American
off topic,
mosque,
but then it goes down the same problem: the imam versus the mosque committee.
Yeah.
They all
Okay,
continue their
yeah.
coffee discussions in courthouses, unfortunately, these days.
Sadly, yeah, that can happen. And that's probably due to not enough corporate experience where there's process and procedures in place. So it's becomes you said this and I said that, but what's your processes? What's your policies? I just want to go change to something else. Would you say that how do you determine when someone's qualified to be a sheikh? Like, would a Bachelor of Islamic Studies qualification get you there, or would a Madrasa studies get you there? Titles are somewhat important in our community.
What do you mean by sheikh? Do you mean
I was going to ask you that because
that's part of the question.
mosque imam or a scholar?
Sheikh.
see, by his question, he's assuming that a mosque imam is not a scholar. Like and it's very cultural specific.
Yes.
When I've been brought up many Turks and I used the word imam, they said, "Oh, he's not an imam, he's a scholar. Don't insult him by saying imam." We're referring to talking about a famous Turkish imam. We go, he's not just an imam.
Yeah.
Because in Turkey, imam hatib schools, it's like just imam is, anyone to...
And there's thousands of mosques. Each one's got an imam kind of thing.
But then again, within the Turkish community, the sheikh means you almost have to be a saintly spiritual leader of a tariqah to be a sheikh. Whereas in the West, we're really struggling. Like, the scholars that I have Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, but Imam Zaid Shakir. I still haven't realized why one is imam, one is sheikh, but some name just stick.
What's Yasir Qadi?
Sheikh Yasir Qadi, but now a lot of them, the times they have doctor and sheikh, so they have that. Yeah.
Isn't it sheikh, doctor?
Sheikh, doctor Yasir Qadi. Yeah.
Imam, yeah.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I really think I'm going to define what you mean by sheikh as a scholar, and I really think that a Muslim scholar has to have 3 key attributes. That one is he or she is sufficiently knowledgeable in Islam, in the disciplines of Islam. And 2, they sufficiently represent, like practice and represent that knowledge within themselves. And thirdly, they are active within the community. They are serving the community. Whether they're appointed to a mosque or not, doesn't matter. I really think these 3 things really makes a person a true sheikh or a scholar.
Because that experiential thing is very important. Him serving and trying to address people's needs and making their knowledge relevant. And if they've had some experience in doing that, it's very critical.
Yes, like how do you teach, let's say, something I'm big on, shukr, gratitude, lately. How do you teach that if you don't practice it yourself?
Well, this is another whole point you talked about, like the spiritual element. Sometimes there's I'll be very honest, I think all the Islamic studies programs are lacking because our religion is so big and it's a university in and of itself, and we're trying to squeeze it
into courses.
Some models, like we know our friends in Cambridge, for example, Cambridge Muslim College, they're already focused on people who've had the seminary education. Then they're just topping it up. That's a bit of a luxury, but if you want to build an imam from scratch, it's hard because sometimes you're trying to teach him critical thinking, but he's trying to learn his farda ayn. So we have, and then we with the scholar development program that we're trying to establish in Arabic, because a lot of people go learn Arabic, but they don't actually apply that Arabic in a structured way to go through a curriculum. We were trying to sort of have this critical thinking and do comparative texts, and even in the fiqh, we chose ikhtiyar, which was said it's not going to be too difficult, it's somewhat more basic compared to Hidayah or some of the more difficult Hanafi texts. but it was actually a very complex text with all this qawaid and it wasn't we didn't have enough background knowledge, so
to be able to critically
so I think it's those three elements are very core thing. You can't imagine a sheikh not having the qiraat goes back to that. Good Quran knowledge is very key, I think. Someone to be able to teach Quran, basic worship matters, fard ayn, but then also having knowledge of the culture, knowing the languages. We have to add that in as a shart, unfortunately, still.
The languages.
Yeah. Just want to say a few things with madrasa. We said some negatives, but there's a lot of positives as well. Like when I went to Egypt, you don't get this opportunity too much in the West. Is you can read the whole Quran cover to cover, and then get an ijaza. And in the qiraat of Quran, that's very important, particularly if you want to start going to other qiraats. The people that are very big on ijazas in America, they started inviting hadith scholars, and they'll come and they give the ijaza.
Do you want to explain what an ijaza is, maybe?
To get like a pretty much, I got an ijaza in Ibn Majah.
You have an ijaza?
Just in Ibn Majah and Tirmidhi. But I got an ijaza of narration, riwayah only. So I literally went and I heard Sheikh Samir Nas, Hafizahullah, he's a Syrian scholar. He came and he read in 10 days Tirmidhi, Jami Tirmidhi. And from one angle, you're like, what is this? There's not much involved. You're just listening. Sometimes some people, they're very picky about this. If you go to the bathroom and come back, they mark the number of hadiths you missed out on. Then you don't have the ijazah on those hadith, and you have to go fill it up. But on the other hand, it's something very special. It's very spiritual.
Right.
You never hear Qala Rasulullah, Qala Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. The whole day you're in your khayal world, you're with the Prophet Sallallahu
You're dreaming.
It's very nice. And I had Turkish friends of mine who were like 20 years of experience as imam. They said this was beautiful. So it really has pros and cons. It's a bit of a sentimental thing, because ultimately we rely on the books. So it depends on what you have ijazah, the hadith, but all the Alamiya programs, they all have this 1 year of hadith ijazah. They call it Dawr al-Hadith, where they go through the whole 6 books. I would love to just attend one of those, because I've come late to Islamic studies. I have all these holes and I'm constantly trying to fill in. It's like waking up and you've missed Fajr that day. So, but the Alamiya program, apparently the sheikhs at the beginning, they read the hadith very slowly.
Right.
And they go, at that first 3 months, the imam is understanding and the teachers. Then they realize they're running out of time. Then they're saying,
speeding up.
then only the teacher understands. Then the last 3 months, they're so short in time that they read so fast that the teacher doesn't understand all the students.
I just want to maybe touch on this ijazah, clarify, because this is sometimes over-glorified or misunderstood. As Ustaz Sadiq mentioned, like ijazah came out as a necessity to prove that you have received hadith from a hadith scholar. Because, you know, the isnad system, referencing on hadith, is very important. And one of the key things that is problematic, or was problematic, to authenticate hadith is proving that someone actually received the hadith from another hadith scholar or narrator. So ijazah system was invented to cover that. So you went into listen to let's say the entire Bukhari collection, or a collection of hadith, let's say even before Bukhari was formed, and then after you listened to that, you were present in the readings when that book was, or a text was being read, and then every day it was recorded, you were present, and then in the end you were given an ijazah, a document that said that you took this knowledge in person from this scholar. That's it. That's what ijazah was and is. But later on, today, it's almost over-glorified. People claim that if you have ijazah in Islam, you have the exact same knowledge that the Prophet ﷺ has, because it goes in chain all the way to Prophet. Then anyone who has ijazah should have exactly the same knowledge as the Prophet ﷺ. But we don't, right? But there's a huge benefit to studying, Islamic disciplines from a teacher who has internalized, digested all that information, all that knowledge, and gives you the gist of it. Sometimes gives you aspects that you may have never thought about. So we all studied from somebody who was qualified, and that's a very good thing to have. But we shouldn't be dismissing any knowledge that doesn't have that ijazah chain, just because it's a, let's say it's a university degree or something. Because I have heard people dismissing university education just because it's not called ijaza or it's not based on that.
Yeah, I think it is held, I mean, and it can be quite elevated, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the Islamic studies knowledge you receive at a university is not of good quality, I suppose.
Yeah, you can't get ijaza as a diploma. Ijaza you get only texts, certain book, and you learn it from someone, a scholar who has got an ijaza, all the way to goes back to the original author.
So from our discussions, and I'm going to start slowly wrapping up, it seems there's a place for both, madrasa style learning as well as for university style Islamic studies learning. They both have their strengths and they both have their weaknesses, but it does seem that we need both. With their imperfections in our current systems, they are both needed. So we can't really dismiss one or the other. So that's the kind of vibe I'm getting today. But before we finish off, was there anything that you wanted to say, that you didn't get a chance to say during the discussion earlier?
Look, I just want to say that I do respect both, education institutions. Madrasa systems are great. Whatever alim programs that they have, it's recognized. They produce good students. But I really think we need to come up with a single educational institution. In our time, it's the universities are recognized as higher education institutions. We just have to make it work within a university structure. Universities have a better regulation. Like there's laws that are passed, there's quality control mechanisms that madrasa system doesn't have, or I don't think it could ever have, because universities have surpassed the madrasa system for the last 200 years. Again, I don't want to be dismissive, but it would be wonderful to have only one institution, and we focus our time and money and resources on that and develop that and excel that for now and for the future.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also discussions like we from Australia, we follow a British system. In America, the universities, it's a bit more of a capitalist country.
Mm-hmm.
But even saying that, some of the top Ivy League universities started off as religious seminaries. They were escaping religious persecution from Europe, and then they came and they established in the free world, and they ended up establishing one of the world-changing universities. So sometimes a lot of our gems that's coming out of the Muslim world, sometimes they're in the form of seminaries. I think I see great future in them. I went to Dallas, I saw Qalam Institute or Dar al-Qasim, professional places, amazing campuses, very well funded, amazing facilities. I saw students, even though some of them didn't have full accreditation, leaving their states, coming, dedicating 3-4 years to learn Arabic, to learn the Arab. So I think there's a lot of benefit, and a lot of these madrasas are being affected by the university culture. And now universities, I think they're trying to fill in the pockets too of more traditional learning, inviting, like Sheikh Amin from Dar al-Qasim would go often to Chicago University, give lectures. So I think there'll be great future for both of them, and I think we should even have more of them, because another topic, when you mentioned the shukr thing, the spirituality, I remember I spoke to someone, he said they had a debate in India whether they should teach tasawwuf or not in madrasas. This is the Nadwi, and they decided not to. Is it a madrasa type thing to be taught and all that? Now, potentially talking about a third of Islam, and you're going to be authoring things on Islam and psychology. We're going into uncharted areas. We need to think about how do we incorporate psychology, spirituality in our education systems. So I think the future's complex, but I think we'll get there. We sort of need all of it and more varieties, perhaps. Allahu Alam.
Definitely.
That requires research as well. Like all these areas requires new research, interdisciplinary research. And this brings us to
the spirituality thing. You almost need like saintly people too to show the way how it's done here.
I think this is another great topic, research in Islamic disciplines.
We
could maybe discuss
just on that. There's a lot of pros and cons.
Pros and cons, and there's so much research that's needed, because research provides the data that drives decision making, but also needs resources, and half the time it's not easy to get the resources for research, not only in the Muslim world but in the generally even within universities. It can be challenging. So definitely that could be our next topic potentially.
I suggest we do a series of this actually.
Oh, okay.
On research, on like PhDs. Islamic psychology.
Especially,
This topic is way big.
It is, yeah. I guess with Islamic psychology, you've got two disciplines coming together. Then, you've got the high degree researcher, right? And maybe the difference between undergrad and postgrad. Online, we didn't even touch on that. Learning online, that's something that's post-COVID
With
become
the video
huge.
on or video off. That's two madrasas, two madhabs.
That's right. So there's a lot in that. Synchronous, asynchronous, all these things. There's so much.
AI, Sheikh AI. People are saying Sheikh AI said this. I checked on.
Yes, AI in the world of research, essay writing, or just general knowledge base. So there's so much to do. So as you can see, we've just scratched the surface, and hopefully we can have more of these podcasts in the future. Thank you for joining, and see you next time. Assalamu alaikum.